Hey y'all, it's time to put diplomacy back into the public square, where differences don't have to mean discord. My name is Chris Brown. I'm a pastor, former Goldman Sachs wealth manager and financial planner. And y'all, I just might lose my manners. But that's okay, as long as I'm minding my manner. Let's get into it. Welcome back to another episode of Mind in My Manner. I'm your host, Chris Brown, and I have a very special guest with us today. Go ahead, Pedro. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Greetings, everyone. Thank you, Chris, for having me on this show today. My name is Pedro Moore. I'm a serial entrepreneur and a former venture capitalist now turned into private equity investor.
Yeah, so I know one thing we have in common, Pedro, is we have two young kids that probably drive us up a wall and up a creek, but we love them dearly.
Yes.
But we both have 6 and 2-year-olds.
Yes.
So with my kids, they're both boys. You have 2 boys as well. Right. But the energy from the younger one is just crazy. I don't know why my younger son beats up on my older son.
Yes.
But
Same here. My son has extra bumps in his head.
Yeah.
Because of the youngest one.
Yeah.
And so as our walls as well. He just, and actually everybody in the house has extra bruises because of our youngest one.
So our oldest never wrote on walls. Never put stuff in his mouth. Never did a lot of that stuff, but all of a sudden he started walking at 13 months. But our second one starts walking at 8 months, draws on walls, puts strange stuff in his mouth. I don't understand where the second born energy comes from, but it was a game changer.
It really was. It's exactly the same situation with me. The oldest was, I mean, he had his challenges, but at the same time, we didn't have to worry about him putting things in his mouth. We didn't really have to worry about him hitting us.
Yeah.
This other one, that's what I'm using that word. This other one, bit us. Hit us with toys. You know what I mean? Likes to explore couches and then get mad because he fell. I'm like, this is your fault. You know what I mean? I didn't tell you climb up like this thing. This is your fault.
Oh my goodness.
So and I'm like, you came from the same human being.
Yeah. So hopefully it all works out on the end. You know, I hear that it's boring if they're too much alike. So fortunately, we got kids who are very different. Who will help to grow us in very different ways.
Yes. Well, I'll say that. To your point, like my oldest is a little more risk averse. And I can see the youngest is more of that risk taker. So my thought is maybe I knew God knew what he was doing, but they needed that balance.
They needed each other.
As they get older, the oldest may not take that full risk sometimes.
Correct.
He may need the younger one with the fire to be able to say, no, go ahead and do it. You'll be okay.
Good.
Kind of thing. And then at the same time, on the opposite end, when the youngest gets a little too far out there,
that's right.
The oldest can say, "Hey, come on back in. Come on back in." So
I'm glad it happened in the order that it happened in. I don't know where it would be if the older one was the more.
You're probably saying, "Yeah, I have one. That's it. I have an only child."
Yeah. So it all worked out the way it's supposed to be. How long you been married now, Pedro?
Oh man, you didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry. I broke it out. I'm giving you time. Think about it, brother. Yeah, man. So let me say it again. How long you been married?
2011.
Okay, all right.
So I just got to do the math in my head.
Okay.
So that was so the math was like 13 years.
13 years. That's good, man. So kudos to 10 plus.
That part out.
Kudos to 10 plus. We did it. We did it, guys. We did it. Yeah. So me and my wife, we just celebrated 10 years this year.
Oh, congrats.
As well.
Congrats.
So it's crazy being married. I guess now younger, right? Are we considered young and married when we got married?
Depending on who you ask.
Yeah.
Because apparently, I was talking to some young guys out of college the other day. I was making a Marvel comic, a Superman reference. Telephone booth, and they just stared at me. And so I realized at that moment I'm old.
They
didn't get the reference at all. Because you think about it, the Man of Steel had no phone booths.
Come on, man.
And so
it didn't make sense to him. It was totally, it shook his categories.
But I do blame their parents. They should have educated him.
That's right.
Show where the real Superman came from. but
It's all right. We can blame the parents. Blame the
yeah.
parents. Blame the parents. Well, man, you come with a whole wealth of experience from both of us. Really, in terms of finance, we have a lot in common. So,
Yes.
got married around the same time. Both have 2 kids. Both are boys around the same age.
Yeah.
And then we're
We're
both
both bald head
we're
too.
both bald headed too. Yes, that's good. Being bald headed won't go back. Amen. Not that I could.
Yeah, same, same.
But we also both work in finances too, which
Yes.
is crazy. But
Yes.
a lot of people, when you say finances, they don't necessarily know that there are a whole bunch of different arenas
Yeah, big time.
of finance.
Big time.
So there's investment banking,
Mhm.
there's private wealth management,
Mhm.
there's asset management,
Mhm.
there's wealth management. Um, all these different types of things. There's, financing for commercial, finance for
Mhm.
residential.
Mhm.
Uh, but you work in an area, private equity,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Speak more about that. What is private
Sure,
equity?
sure,
Yeah.
sure. Well, and I'm gonna start with private equity is basically where a lot of investors pull money together.
Yeah.
And most of the time they buy other businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Now there is a subset where I originally came from, which is venture capital, which is but the same premise
Yeah.
where the investors pull money together.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case with venture, instead of buying majority ownership of a business, they buy more of a minority stake.
Mm-hmm.
And the industry that they play in the most is high technology,
Right.
high growth technology oriented companies.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the world that I come in, but then now I'm more shifted into private equity,
Right.
get into more of buying businesses. But those are typically those financings are
Yeah.
done with companies that are not publicly traded.
Right. How did you end up in venture capitalism?
Sure. Um, long story short is when I was in college, I made a little history where at the University of Delaware, I co-founded the student organization called Entrepreneurship Club.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I wanted to, I loved always passionate about entrepreneurship, but there was no way to kind of connect
Mm-hmm.
business school with other schools in that area. And
Right.
so I started the club as a way to find other students in different that have a similar passion on entrepreneurship, but maybe
Mm-hmm.
came from fashion or
Mm-hmm.
culinary or hospitality, et cetera, et cetera. And so through a few connections, one of my guest speakers
Yeah.
was a venture capitalist, and so from that relationship, because I'm big on relationships, he asked me, "Hey, he used to also put on conferences where he connected
Right.
investors and other entrepreneurs."
Yeah.
And so he would ask me
Mm-hmm.
as an intern, well, really not an intern. He liked free labor and I wanted to succeed. So, we just had a handshake and
Yeah.
basically I came in and helped him out a lot of his conferences. And so we ended up building a good rapport.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually how I first met Damon John back then, even before
Mm-hmm.
Shark Tank. So fast forward, and by the time I graduated, I did take other jobs and all that. He had an opening at his firm,
Mm.
and because of our prior relationship of me doing that work for him, because I don't, based off my resume,
Yeah.
I don't have the resume to be a VC. I didn't go
Mm-hmm.
to an Ivy League. I don't even
Mm-hmm.
have a master's. I
Right.
didn't even study finance
Yeah.
in undergrad. I took a
Mm-hmm.
couple courses, and even those courses I got like a C in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So but he knew my work ethic, he
Sure.
knew I had hunger, and so he took me in, showed me the game, taught me the game, and basically opened up his Rolodex, and that's kind of how I got into it.
Right. That's great. You mentioned about that hunger and that drive. I was actually just at my firm's annual conference,
Mhm.
and the advisors, we did breakout sessions between people who do operations and human resources, and then the advisors went into our own kind of fireside chat, and we had a conversation with our CEO of the company. And what I knew is that when he acquired our firm about a year ago, I had made several different calls and inquiries around, who's this guy,
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
taking over, and like, you know, what's he about? And what I was hearing actually at the time is that he had lost a lot of people. So his CIO had passed
Mhm.
away. His mother-in-law and his father-in-law had both passed away too. All this happened within like a 10 to 12 month time frame, and now he was negotiating this deal to buy, my firm.
Mhm.
And so I was just like, how is he able to do all this? So I actually got to ask him at our conference.
Awesome.
I
Awesome.
said, tell me more about how you were able to navigate all the stuff that you were doing, but you are still doing mergers, acquisitions.
Mhm.
You're so hungry.
Mhm.
And he was able to tell me, I am very intentional about the relationships and the things that I do pour myself into,
Mhm.
and my reasons for doing so. But the one thing that I can't teach is drive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that
Yeah.
just, taught me
Yeah.
a huge lesson to be
Yeah.
like, you can learn a lot of things that are, tangible.
Correct.
But there are some
Correct.
things that are intangible that you just can't learn.
Correct.
Um, but what I've found though is that there are still tangible barriers
Mhm.
for a lot of people getting into certain segments of finances and other
Mhm.
different things of that sort.
Mhm.
And so even if someone has a drive,
Mhm.
they still may not have opportunity
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
actually get into the segments that you found, yourself in. Do you find a lot of time that you are one of the only,
Big time.
black folks in the room?
Big time. Big
Yeah.
time. And now I will admit, it has improved over the years. When
Yeah.
I first got in, this is maybe 2010 or so. So whenever I went to a conference, or anything like that, I mean, let's just say the conference is 100 or so people.
Yeah.
Um, maybe one or two,
Yeah.
look similar to me.
Mhm.
Now the good part is, I will admit that it has improved. There's a
Mhm.
lot more of us that are doing it, and even
Yeah.
having I'm gonna use the term a check writer, because that's
Right.
important. Because there are people that, and because I was not a check writer, but
Right.
I was a person that will analyze a deal. And
Yeah.
a check writer is important because that's the decision
Mhm.
maker. There was times when we do some deals that I said no, but because I was not a check writer, the firm
They
still
still wrote it.
invested.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Yeah.
so, you are absolutely right. And even though there is a higher percentage of more black and brown people doing venture deals, um, the percentage is still low,
Yeah.
and that percentage is even lower in private equity. And
Right.
private equity basically owns the whole world almost.
Yeah.
And so, but these roles, these opportunities, um are very, very hard to get into, and you have to have the invisible skill ingredients such as hunger and drive.
Mhm.
Because even now, what I'm trying to do, I'm actually trying to build $100 million private equity firm.
Mhm.
I don't have anyone in my immediate Rolodex that
Mhm.
has done that
Mhm.
before.
Mhm.
I have to be very intentional
Right.
to go out, shake hands that are
Mhm.
with people who probably don't look like me,
Mhm.
and probably is extremely wealthy
Right.
and is
Right.
way smarter and
Right.
all of that
Mhm.
stuff, to basically ask them the question, how do I do this,
Mhm.
and how do I do that?
Mhm.
And so fortunately, like I do have a opportunity where I'm looking for someone. Well, I haven't gotten approved yet, but we do have opportunity on the table for a possible first investment to
Right.
kind of help launch this firm. But it's very, very difficult, but you have to be intentional
Mhm.
and be okay with doors
Yeah.
being slammed.
Right.
And by the way, as you're doing down this road, back to your point about having that hunger, I'm doing all this because my mother just passed,
Mm.
a few years ago.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so I could just say, woe was me
Mhm.
and blah blah blah, all that good stuff.
Mhm.
But um, I don't want that to be my legacy.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? There's things I have to do, and so there's days I may cry, but there's
Mhm.
days I'm hitting the pavement.
Mhm.
And so, but I will, the beauty of the internet, you can find people.
Right.
And so going back to the point of intentionality, you in order to get into rooms where it's not have doesn't have a high density of people that look
Mhm.
like you,
Mhm.
you have to figure out how to break that barrier.
Right.
Whatever that process is. You know what I mean?
So the barriers you've talked about a couple of the barriers. So
Mm-hmm.
one is the educational piece in terms of
Yeah.
the networking that happens from the good old boy club,
Mm-hmm.
essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to the right school, is if it's Ivy or
Mm-hmm.
Ivy affiliated, like a
Mm-hmm.
Stanford or something
Correct,
like
correct,
that,
correct.
um, certainly that gives you a leg up
Yeah.
into entering, this kind of niche market. But also, if you have the knowledge about what the particular barriers are, or if you just have the financial knowledge, maybe you're smart, you got recommended by teachers or all those other
Mm-hmm.
different types of things.
Mm-hmm.
So, but what about for people who are like you that are coming I would guess you would say from non-traditional aspects. What are some of the key barriers that you felt you overcame, and what would you say are probably the most important to identify to give people a way in, I guess you could
Sure,
say?
that's a good question. I'm gonna say knowledge of whatever field that is,
Mm,
because you will be judged
mm.
immediately if you don't know what you're doing. Because that's what
Oh,
happened
that's
with me
good.
over the years. As I learned venture, there's things I got wrong I didn't know. They
Mhm.
brought that to my attention, and then in a subtle way,
Yeah,
they think you're not good enough.
yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, and especially because they're going to judge you. They're
Right.
going to judge you. You get judged all the time. And actually, I just had a did a post the other day. The scariest thing I think for America is an intelligent black man,
Yeah,
because they think that we don't know much,
yeah.
you know. And so now when I a lot of times get into conversation and meetings with people, I realize that they're talking to me. Well, I shock a lot of people, put it
Mhm.
like that, because I look normal. My name
Yeah,
is Pedro, so you
yeah,
might think I'm Hispanic.
yeah.
But then when you see my naps, he's a black man. But point is that they prejudge, and
Yeah.
then I start holding conversation. They're like, oh, this guy knows sometimes more than them.
Mhm, mhm,
Like I know what I'm talking about, and so but there is that barrier of that prejudgment,
mhm.
and but I think what helps
Yeah.
it doesn't take it away, but it helps improve
Mhm,
is the knowledge that
mhm,
you really know what you're talking about. And over this may happen over time, and that you actually have some experience around
mhm,
that, some
mhm,
trial and error
mhm.
of doing some opportunities.
That's good.
For example, like my church, I helped my church get equity in an actual for-profit business.
Mhm.
And so little things like that, where some people are
Right.
like, man, how did you do that? Well, I kind of figure it out,
Mhm,
and so helping doing little things like that, it may not be the standard Harvard League type.
right.
Because to your point, I didn't come from any of that. But
Mhm,
then I recently attended an event,
mhm.
and I realized, like, I'm just as good. And my good friend here, she said, "Man, you could be on that panel," and so I realized that
Yeah,
I am good enough. It's
right.
just that we weren't exposed to certain things.
Correct.
That's the only difference.
So self-exposure, overcoming what probably is a very natural feeling to feel like you aren't good enough. Knowledge about that particular industries or deep knowledge, I guess
Yeah,
you
yeah.
say.
Well, and
Those are
I'm
important
actually going to
things.
correct
Yeah.
myself a little bit.
Mhm.
I don't want to say you have to have deep knowledge, because here's the part that I think we suffer from, and I suffer from. We feel like we have to be the best, which in some
Mm.
cases is true. But I shared something with on my Instagram
Mhm.
about President Obama said, former President Obama said, talked about that you'd be shocked at how um, people running countries
Mhm.
are not always
Right.
the smartest person in the room. You know what I mean? They just happen to be more exposed to certain things. And so my point is
You don't know how true
that's
you speaking right
yeah,
now, man.
and that's the thing that I've learned
Mhm.
is that I've been talking to some people. I'm like, you didn't know that? Like, hold on, what? I'm like,
Mhm.
what? Wait a second, didn't you go there? Like,
Mhm.
what? Why? Didn't you have that Ivy League education? Why? How come
Right.
I have more things
Mhm.
up my belt? So even with Harvard, for example, the event we went to, they are programming these students to
Mhm.
buy businesses as soon
Mhm.
as they graduate.
Right.
You know what I
Exactly.
mean? And
Yep.
so the good part is there is a little bit more diversity in there. But the
Mhm.
point is that and that's more recent, but they've been exposed to that. All it
Mhm.
is just that that other counterpart had a head start.
Mhm.
You are
Mhm.
probably good enough even with the basic knowledge you have, but they just had a head start.
Right.
And then they try to program you to say that you are not good enough because you
Mhm.
don't have all the pedigrees.
So one of the things that, kind of you're just sparking in my mind is, well, there are a few things we don't teach our kids in school anymore, right? So, like, old folks will, well, I won't say old, but older folks talk a lot about how we don't teach budgeting and finances in grade school anymore, which is true, which you probably should. It might help a lot of folks out in terms of, especially in terms of like helping to build credit
Mhm.
and a lot of the things that create barriers, later on. But what I'm also hearing from you is even, the structure of business, that if I'm not getting to that college level education at a university that is very purposeful about continuing and perpetuating this inclusivity of their alumni in terms of helping them and guiding them into, this business way of life. It sounds like we need to bring that down into our schools in a palatable way.
Yeah.
And that might help a lot of our folks that don't get into college, because you don't even need an undergraduate degree in order to go about doing a lot of the stuff
Oh, no, not
that
at
you're
all.
talking about.
Yeah, not at all.
So, but there are people who may have performed, not well enough in high school to get into college or get into a certain college, but who could maybe take on some of the knowledge that you're talking about and still participate in some of these
Yeah,
things.
I would say anybody. And to your point, I think one of the barriers we got to stop assuming that we need. I'm by the way, before I say this, I am for education,
Yeah,
for college and
absolutely.
all that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to say that you got to, in order to be successful in life,
Mm-hmm.
that this is a requirement.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a lot of people that have made success. Learning, yes, you always have to continue to learn something. Does it always have to come in the format of a college degree?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But I think the good part is a lot more resources out there today that we can learn and educate ourselves on to help advance us
Mm-hmm.
further.
Mm-hmm.
Because you mentioned even credit, and so those things are important. But I'm also going to advocate that we just learn how the game is really ran from all facets.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to use this example. Mark Zuckerberg probably raised well over $1 billion in venture funding,
Right.
but they never pulled his credit once.
Mm-hmm.
But there's people out here trying to get a loan for $50,000.
Mm-hmm.
They gotta have good credit.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So just understanding that those two worlds exist in
Mm-hmm.
the same. You know what I mean? And so,
Absolutely.
because to say that only way to do something is this way
Is this way.
is that's also false.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to highlight that because no
Yeah.
one ever pulled Mark Zuckerberg's credit,
Mm-hmm.
because in the world of venture, you don't pull credit.
Right.
I mean, if you can if you want to,
Yeah.
but a lot of times it's about the business at hand. And sometimes even when you buy a business, depending on the revenue size, you'd be shocked by this. Sometimes I think under 10 million, if you get I think under 10 million, they may still have to go after pulling personal credit.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can buy businesses that are larger than that,
Right.
they don't pull credit at that
Mm-hmm.
point because they're looking at the business performance.
Correct.
So just little things like that, just
after that time, personal
educating
credit
the
doesn't
game.
matter. Yeah.
Exactly. Educating how the game works in its entirety.
Yeah. I've
know?
actually seen people who are, multimillionaires. I saw a person, I applied him for a credit card when I was working at a bank, and he was worth $100 million. He got declined for a credit card. Because there's too much. There's like too much for the system to even maybe I shouldn't have been the one applying for a credit card in the bank.
Yeah.
But he got declined. He's just like, it's happened. Yeah, that's normal.
Yeah. See.
But I'm looking at his bank account. I know his commercial housing portfolio, and all those different types of things. But he's still not able to participate in a regular type of way. So it just tells you this divergence.
Oh, absolutely. And I found out too that there's a certain net worth level where credit is not as important, where they leverage your assets.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are a certain tier of wealth, that they just look at what you have and you can put that up.
Yeah.
And no questions asked.
No questions.
No questions asked.
Man, I mean, it's a different world that a lot of people that don't look like us live in. That we want to get more of us's into those spaces. Exactly. And that's not because we're discriminatory. I think it's because we want to be fair. That we want all spaces to be representative and indicative of what the diversity of the United States of America looks like.
Absolutely. And I like to say is that if you have any competitive spirit, you should want the diversity, because if you are a Caucasian man and your opponent is a black man, but he's the best,
right?
You want to challenge that.
Right.
Because you want to win.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things I love about the movie 42 with Jackie Robinson.
Yeah.
Because that coach, he cared more about winning than racism.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if we focus more on that, we will just naturally see more diversity. You know, because I use the analogy of let's just say we all want to play basketball, because you know a lot of times they think of diversity as putting up a handicap sign to help us out. Like, no, we see you in there playing basketball,
Right.
but you keep shutting the door on us.
Yeah.
We're just as talented as you. I want a chance to dunk on you.
Exactly.
That's all I'm asking.
And so people don't understand what's happening when they're shutting out diversity is they're actually closing the door on the next doctor, on the next innovation, on the next, business idea, because diversity in terms of ethnicity and race and formation also leads to diversity in thought and our different approaches. And when you have diversity in thought, now you can have you're opening the barn doors for innovation and ingenuity and all those different types. And so people have no idea how much you're actually limiting the potential of cities, regions, nations when you actually are limiting people from getting to next barriers.
Exactly. For another perfect example, the super soaker gun would have never been invented.
Right.
If it wasn't because of diversity.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. 100%.
You know what I mean? For those that don't know,
Yeah.
the super soaker gun was invented by Lonnie Johnson. He invented the patent and then licensed the patent to, I think, Hasbro.
Right.
And the brother made over probably $70-80 million off of that.
From a water gun.
From a water gun. From a water gun. You know?
Yeah.
And I think he also did is it what's the other one? Nerds?
A Nerf gun?
Nerf gun.
Ah,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. I think he did that one too.
Oh, he's just a big kid.
Yeah,
That's all he is.
basically.
he was like, I'm gonna lean into being a kid. That's what it is.
Yeah.
All right, that's good. Well, I mean, talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I was talking to you before about this article. Well, it's not an article, but it was the video of Trump outlining plans for reparations, or the resurface video, where basically he was saying he was going to be trying to set up a separate committee or shop to monitor colleges for their equity initiatives. And then if he finds that they're behaving in a way that's promoting equity and initiatives in a way that he doesn't like or doesn't prefer, he's going to be taxing their endowments and fining them and using the money then to repay restitution to folks that were harmed. So in a lot of these ways, these are white folks. So that the idea is essentially reparations for college or would-be college level white folks that aren't getting into colleges because other colleges are pursuing equity initiatives to increase diversity in their schools, which we just talked about what the benefit of diversity is and how diversity of thought and those other things contribute to competition, healthy competition, as well as diversity of thought. I'm just curious. I feel like this rubs up against kind of what we just talked about and the benefit of that thing. I'm just curious about your thoughts.
I don't know too much about that thing about it. However, though, my only question is, why all of a sudden now you have great ideas? When our ancestors couldn't use the same bathroom, how come that thought wasn't? It couldn't happen then. Now all of a sudden, now we all of a sudden innovative. These great ideas. For reparation. I don't really have an exact answer around that. It is just disappointing that now we have in these, for example, to tax a university. I didn't even know you can do that because universities are basically a nonprofit.
Correct. Yeah.
And so I didn't even know that was an option. So how come that couldn't happen, 60, 70 years ago? You're right.
For the universities when they were banning folks from coming into the schools.
From coming into the schools.
And so we couldn't have reparations or restitution then. And then what we're doing in the form of reparations and restitution in terms of trying to now take intentional measures to increase diversity at the schools, now that's a problem. So it wasn't a problem before.
Correct.
Or was a theoretical problem that, we're trying to be the good Americans. We're now trying to open up the things despite what our history may have been, and we didn't let people in. And now you guys are welcome. But no reparations. But
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
now that we have a kind of informal process, or schools might have an informal process to kind of champion diversity, even if it's not all like goodwill and like
Mhm.
it's not by the goodwill of the schools that they're championing diversity, right?
Correct.
There's some
Correct.
benefit to
Correct.
them in terms of their donors,
Correct.
or just a moralistic, superiority complex that they might have.
Correct. Correct.
There's some type of
Correct.
benefit
Correct.
that they're getting back from that. But regardless, equity initiatives in and of itself are typically a positive thing.
Yeah, yeah, and if you think about even from I wish I had the video, but I remember seeing this video on Instagram. The guy talked about, I think, the top 3 reasons why most, if it wasn't because of got into Harvard,
Yeah.
if it wasn't because of necessarily education, it was because his daddy was a big great donor, or there's some family coming in. But he gave like 3 reasons that was unrelated to intelligence.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, but then there's a carrot on our end, where not a carrot, but a major requirement that the only way we can get in is through intelligence.
Yeah.
But you have a whole bunch of others who got in, not because of intelligence, And so it's to that point. It's to kind of level the playing field. Yeah. So hey, so and so got in. If Billy Bob got in because his dad owns whatever company, but his SAT is 700.
Right.
Well, then Joe should get in there because his SAT is maybe 800.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference?
Mm-hmm.
Other than Dad did provide a nice handsome check last year.
That's right. I mean, we all know George W. Bush was not the best student at Yale, but he still has a Yale degree regardless.
Yeah.
Because he Nepo baby.
Yeah.
So that's all we want.
Yeah.
We just want participation to be able to be Nepo babies.
Exactly. Participation. We just want to get in the game and play. That's all. We ain't asked for no extra handouts. You don't need to lower the rim.
Yeah.
We just need to get in the game and play. That's all we're asking.
Yeah. So I think fairness is the key. And for me, trying to institute a department that enforces, in effect, reparations for white folk, you just can't do that. Like, you just can't do that. And you have to be and operate in good faith with most folks. If we're going to wind down equity initiatives, it's because you have a belief that we can get our way to equity in a better way than what we've been doing, and not slow our pace towards equity. And that's what a lot of my concern is.
I'm kind of on that same sentiment as well. Like, if you're going to decrease the D&I initiative, that's fine. But what are we doing to make sure I can get in the game and play?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And I don't know the answer to that. But my whole point is, like, you better not lock the door.
Yeah.
Don't lock the door on me, because I'm just as good,
Yeah.
if not better,
100
than the people already on the court.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are somehow blocking me in, you are making the reason for D&I initiatives to exist.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just my whole premise. If you're not gonna have it, that's fine. But I just want to verify that, or want to make sure that you ain't locking the door on us.
Yeah. So Donald Trump, don't do that. Okay.
Yeah.
don't do that, sir. I'm praying for you, but don't do that. Okay. All right. In terms of just some things that I was really curious to ask you. As we kind of wrap things up, how do you go about, as a Black man, creating legacy for your family? What are some of the things you prioritize in terms of what you're teaching your kids, what you're trying to set up for them? And you might not have all this figured out just yet, but you're conceptualizing, and I'm kind of brainstorming off of you too, because our kids are the same age.
Yeah.
But what are some of the things that you're doing?
Well, and what I'm going to share, and I'm not saying that I'm good at this.
Okay.
I'm still trying to figure this out. But one of the things is not to broadcast my insecurities onto my son. So, for example, there was one time, as you know, I said earlier, my oldest is a little more reserved, not as much of a risk taker.
Yeah.
And so there was one time we were in the park, and I was trying to get him to get on this thing. Which is just getting up and just being a kid. And, but there was another kid, maybe half his size, just doing backflips on it. And I'm like, come on, get up there, blah, blah, blah. And then I did something and I regretted it and I had to apologize. That's one thing as a squirrel moment. I do apologize.
Yes, that's good.
When I make a mistake, I let them know.
Yeah, I do that too.
Growing up, they didn't have that. But I compared them to the other kid. And I said, well, he can do it. How come you can't do it? And I broke him down. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to do that again. And because I also realized, I was like, okay, maybe that ain't his strength.
Right.
But I also know my boy is very smart. That might be his strength. And I don't want him to, because of dad's insecurity, I don't want him to be insecure because of dad's imperfect self. And so if science is his way, science will be his way, regardless if he touches the ball. Now, granted, I would love him to do some kind of sport, but if he doesn't, but maybe he's the one that cures, creates a solution to cancer. You know what I mean? And so you don't want the kid that's about to cure cancer spend all his time trying to, figure out how to play basketball.
Or he's the scientist that comes up with the helmet so that, football players won't get concussions anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we can actually see, the appropriate amount of violence in football. They don't play like whips anymore. So, you know what I'm saying? So maybe something like that. No, go ahead.
No, that's exactly it. But that's probably the one biggest thing. And then I think the other thing is one, just being present. But and the hard part, and we all in here are entrepreneurs too, or in a working career, demanding careers. Is still going after the goal, whatever that career goal is, but at the same time still trying to balance the family time,
right?
And so that might mean, even if it means 15 minutes, he gets all of dad for 15 minutes, And the last thing is I do show them love. You know what I mean? Like, and it varies sometimes. Like I just found out he got like 100% on he's counting math.
Right.
So what I went up to him and I picked him up and I just threw him around.
Right.
You know what I mean? And he would just put me down, but he's laughing and all that. But that was dad showing good job, kind of I love you feel. And every now and again I'll give him a little hug too. But just to embrace that, like he knows that he can come to dad.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like touching your kids is a really important part of them having positive self-image, and also positive body positivity as well. Whether or not you have a son or a daughter, to touch your kids, kiss your kids, hug your kids, whatever way you want to show love, but not hold back.
Correct.
In physical love, so they have an appropriate sense of how to love someone physically too, because at some point in time they're going to become a husband or a wife. They're going to become a father or a mother, and you want them to be able to love in the appropriate way. Correct. So if we haven't done that, we're not giving them the tools and that they need perhaps to really succeed. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So that I share that with you as well. Paying attention to your kids' individual idiosyncrasies, and not chastising them for what they are not. Is a huge thing, and I heard that from you. Our sons are very similar. Our oldest, in terms of my oldest, is very deliberate about everything that he does. So in terms of him putting on his shoes in the morning, what jacket he wants to wear, the clothes that he does for his uniforms, all those particular types of things, he puts thought into almost everything that he does, and it can slow him down a bit. And so I can be like, Jude, it's time to go. It's time to we need to go 5 minutes ago or whatever. Like come on, get your stuff together. And I've had to work myself out of that type of style of parenting. Because his personality is informing how he moves and what he does, and that's a part of who he is. And I can't judge him about that.
So basically, I shouldn't holler at them in the morning when I'm trying to get them all dressed. And I'm glad you said that earlier too, that we brainstorm off each other. That's one thing I do. I'll be like, "Come on, why aren't your shoes on?"
Exactly.
So I'm gonna do better.
Nah, man. It's it's sometimes being a dad, you raise your voice a bit and you don't realize that it sounds harsh harder.
Yeah.
And it sounds a lot rougher than than when mom might say things.
Yeah.
And so we scare easily.
Yeah.
And
I have
over scare
noticed
easily.
that, and there's been a couple of times he froze, like a deer in the headlights. I'm like, oh, maybe that was a little too loud. Yeah.
That's good, man. Yo, Pedro, thank you so much for stopping by today.
Thank you for having me.
That's all the time we have today on Minding My Manner. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode. Make sure you catch us on Apple, Spotify, watch us on YouTube, hit that follow and subscribe button. We'll see you next time on the next episode.